Okay, let's move on to setup, and I'll show you how to install and get going with Grails. So start with installing. If you are on Mac or Linux, the first thing I would do is install SDKMAN, which is a manager that allows you to install Groovy, Grails, Scala, a whole bunch of frameworks and libraries. It's very nice command line utility. Just go to SDKMAN.io and there's a little installation here. I'd go through that. If, on the other hand, you're stuck on Windows, I would say you download it and install it the traditional way of putting it on your path and setting Grails home. And there is also this other alternative called POSH-GVM. SDKMAN actually used to be called GVM, but was changed because GVM is also a Groovy, not a Groovy, a Go-based utility as well. I've tried using this once and didn't really get it to go, but if you're big on PowerShell, this might work for you. But moving on, go to the command line, and basically I'll show you SDKMAN. So you just type SDK, hit enter, and it shows you all the commands that you can do, what things you can install, how to get the list of things you can install. So what I'm going to do is SDK and ls Grails. And basically this shows you all of the possible versions that you can install from this tool. What versions I have installed, what's the default version that's being used, and you can use this tool to set what Grails you're going to use just either for this command line or as the default in general, which is very useful. So moving on from that, since I already have Grails installed, I'll just type in Grails and -- version just so you can see that I indeed am using 3.0.1.7. It also shows you the Groovy version that this version of Grails uses and the version of the JVM that I'm using. And I should mention that you do have to install the JVM before you start using Grails because it is a JVM based framework. So there are plenty of other tutorials out there that will show you and tell you how to do that for your system. I'm not going to talk about that in this tutorial. So just to get started, let's do a Grails create -app, and we'll just call this T2 because I already have T1 from the other day. So that created my Grails app, and we can cd to T2, and you can see this is where we have our Grails installed. So another thing I can do is just do a Grails run -app just to get this up and running and show you the very basic application. It takes a little while to pull things down. If you haven't run Grails before, it'll take a little bit longer because it has to pull in all its dependencies. And this should be coming up shortly. And it's running, so I'm just going to copy that, go back to the browser, get a new tab here, hit enter, and there's our first Grails application up and running. You get this little info page by default, which gives you some status, what plugins are installed, and just a little, hello there. So we'll be seeing this a lot through the tutorial, but let's move on a little bit. Go back here. Let's see. We created an app. I'm going to mention the fact that Grails 3 does have profiles. What we did when we did the create app was we used the default web profile. There are actually others now and probably more to come. I know there's a REST-based profile. I know there's an an Angular profile, which has more specific Angular stuff to it. And what these profiles do is they give you a default set of plugins and scripts so that it makes developing that particular kind of app even easier. So it gives you even more convention, based on the type of app. And this also makes it so that Grails can be more than just a servlet-based web app, which is what the web profile is and what I'm going to be showing you in this tutorial. But this gives it a lot more promise in the future. Something else I'm not going to be showing you in this tutorial, but I want to mention it here, are the JSON views. Those come in 3.1. They look very similar to the JSON marshallers to me, which I'm not a huge fan of. Through this tutorial, I'll show you some of the ways how I deal with JSON. But that, I think, is a matter of taste and preference. But there's documentation, so you can look into those as well. So moving on, we're going to show you an IDE. So my IDE of choice is IntelliJ. So what I'm going to do here is one of the things I found with IntelliJ, depending on how you start, it will go through things slightly differently. I like to have an application open and then do project from existing sources. And see, we had T1 here, and let's see, let's just do refresh so that it sees T2, and then we're going to click on the build.gradle, do OK, and I am going to use a local distribution of Gradle, just because this is a faster and better version than the one that comes with Grails. But you can use the Gradle wrapper, which comes with it by default. If you don't have a separate version of Gradle, you can also, as you see in the path, I used SDKMAN to install it. Another thing is I'm going to uncheck this create separate module per source set, just because I found that it kind of does weird things. I'm not sure if it should be doing those, but I prefer to have that off. So we'll click OK. And this will do its thing, pulling in the application, going through the build.gradle, and it will bring it into our app here. So one of the things that I want to show you is the Gradle tab. So this is something that you will be coming back to fairly often. One thing you'll be doing here is when you change anything related to plugins or dependencies, you'll want to click the refresh and have it refresh its dependencies, which I'll do every time I switch branches on the sample app that I'm going to show. The reason that I have this one up here in particular is so that I can do a run through of all of the folders that it generates, because when I save this and commit this to get, any empty folders just go bye-bye. So basically it's hard to talk about things that aren't there. So just a quick rundown of what's in a Grails project. We have the Gradle, which is just the wrapper, which I told you about a little earlier. Most of the files will be in the Grails app. Actually, I should tell you just the build. This is where it builds to. So if you do a Grails war, it'll actually put the war here and all that type of stuff. The idea is just for IntelliJ, and the .gradle is just a cache for, I think, using Gradle. So, but most of the main stuff is within the Grails app. So the first thing you have is assets, and in assets you have a place for images, JavaScript, and style sheet. So this is where you'd put more of your front end stuff, and this is ties into the asset management plugin. So once you go beyond the intro and learn about how the asset management plugin works, this is what would tie into that. Moving on, there's conf, and in here we have a Spring folder where we have resource.groovy, and this is where you can define beans and override beans. It gives you a nice little groovy DSL for doing that. Probably in a future video beyond the intro videos, I'll show you a little bit with how to use this. But for now, this is where you would do your Spring Bean type stuff. So moving on from that, we have the application.yaml. This is where all your configuration goes, although in the next video I'm going to show you the application.groovy because I'm not a big fan of the application.yaml. But this is where you put your basic configuration, some of the default configuration you'll see here. I'll talk more about that in the future videos. So moving on, you have logback.groovy because instead of log4j, which was used in previous versions of Grails, they now use logback, and this is where you do the configuration for logging. Moving on again, we have controllers, and in here we have URL mappings. This used to be in the configuration, but was moved out to controllers because it has a very close tie to controllers, and I think it's also to make it a little bit more like Spring Boot. But anyways, so you get like the default mappings here, which the default mapping is controller action, an optional ID, and a optional format. And that will route to basically the URLs route to your controllers. We have /, which routes to the view index, which I'll talk about views later, and just some error mappings like 500 and 404, which map to other views, and I'll talk about those again later. You also have a place for domains. It doesn't generate any of those up for you by default, but these are essentially your models. And what actually tie to your data store, which by default is Hibernate, which is a database, but it could be a NoSQL database like Mongo or Redis. I think there are a few other ones that are supported out of the box, but those are the main ones that I can think of off the top of my head. Moving on, we also have a place for I18N bundles. And basically what these are is they allow you to internationalize your app. So this is a good place to put any text strings that are going to be viewed within your app and use these just to reference these. So like if the locale is changed, basically it'll show the right translation. You can also have some variables that get passed in. It gets passed in as an array, as I recall, which is a little strange, but it works. And let's see, moving on, we have init, and in here we have bootstrap, which this also used to be into the config folder, but got moved to init because it's something that initializes. So you have a init closure where you can do any type of startup, and we'll use this in future videos just to set up some basic stuff into the in-memory database. It also has a destroy, so if you want to do anything when the application is being taken offline, you can do that here. Also, you'll see that it has another folder which is the same as the project name and this application. This is what makes it a kind of a Spring Boot application, because this is the application's main class, which means that you can run this without running it from Grails. You can just run it as a Java-based application, and it'll run the main run from the main method. You can also do some configuration here, like if you wanted to do, say, a component scan, do something more on the Spring side. So if you were integrating something from, specifically from Spring Boot, you could do that here. There's also a way, which I have to dig up, of doing configuration that's overridable, like per environment, and you can do that. I know that you could set that up here. But I'll have to find that and put that in a future video. Alright, so moving on. We also have a place for services. Oh, wait a minute. I didn't actually finish talking about controllers. I forgot that. So there's the URL mappings, which will map to controllers. And controllers are pretty much the entry ways into your app. You'll have actions in these controllers, like say list, update, delete, and things of that nature. And basically all the controllers should be really concerned with is routing and sending messages back to the client. You should not have your business logic here. Now, when I generate up some of the some controllers based on domain classes, you'll see that the defaults actually put the logic into the controllers, which is a huge mistake, and I don't think that Grails should do that, just because people who are new to Grails don't understand that your logic really shouldn't be here by default. Like, it's good for just setting up and playing with the application. It's a good quick starter, but it's not where your application logic should be. Your application logic should be in services. So services, which are transactional by default, are where you should have your main business logic. And basically services are essentially spring beans that you can inject into controllers or even other services. You should be careful that you don't get loops by injecting the same service in reciprocal services, because that will cause problems. But that's what you would use service for. Tag libs, I haven't used these extensively, but you can create your own tag libraries. I would say this is more used for plugin developers, maybe the Angular based plugins, where they can create their own tag libs, which tap into some of the Angular type frameworks, but I haven't dealt a lot with this. I'm personally not really a front-endy guy. I'm more in the back end, but you can use that if you want. They also included this utils folder. Why? It's basically they gave you a dumping ground for things that don't really fit into the app, but that you still want the framework to be technically aware of. So this is where you could put things like objects or classes that don't actually fall into the normal Grails conventions of controllers and services. Maybe if you created say some lower level servlet filters or things like that, you might put those here. Another thing that Grails does have is interceptors, which are kind of like servlet filters, and usually I believe those usually live under the controllers folder. So moving on, we have the views folder, and this is where your GSPs will go. Depending on what type of application you're making, you might not have a whole lot of GSPs. You might not even really have any, for that matter, if you're say using Angular or Ember or any of those front end apps. It's a good place to get started. It's good for, I would say, for login pages, password change pages, and stuff like that, because it has some good things for cross-site request forgery and things like that. But it can also be used for some setup stuff, because it has layouts which actually get injected into the GSP pages. GSP pages are fairly similar to JSP pages. Essentially, you basically render to them and pass them a model, which is just a map of things that you'd want to put into the GSP. They're essentially just enhanced HTML, if you will. Alright, so moving on, there's the source folder, which is actually outside the Grails app. And here is where you might put integration tests or unit tests. And basically what I'd say about that is you can test pretty much anything you want in Grails. However, should you test everything in Grails? That's up to you. How far you want to take it. If you want to go TDD all the way, you can. But I would suggest that you test basically your services and any custom logic that you add to domains. You shouldn't be adding a lot of custom logic to domains, but there are times where you might add custom constraints or getters, which I'll talk about a little bit later. Special getters for a special purpose. Normally, because of the way Groovy works, you don't have to add getters, but this is to work around a specific issue, so I'll talk about that later to come. So there's also the ability to do integration tests, which I don't do a whole lot of. But this is, these are good for, going up that one level higher that will actually attach itself to a database. The drawback here is these take a lot longer. But you should do some type of test. I would say I would probably, in my opinion, I'd skip the integration test and do functional tests instead, and go that extra mile, which you can do using Jeb, and I know there's some built-in stuff for that. There is also the main folder, which this is also another place where it's kind of the dumping ground, almost like the utils that I showed you before, but this sits outside your application, and there are some reasons why you might want to put things outside of your application. I can't think of what they are offhand, but like before, I know if you want like an interface or something like that, you might put that in here, or something along those lines. There's also a web app folder. This is more legacy than anything else, but it's another place to put like HTML and JavaScript that isn't really known to about the asset pipeline plugin. So if you want something that doesn't know about, you would probably stick that in here. Or if you have legacy stuff from a previous application. It used to be, I think, web-app, but now it's just web app and altogether. So moving along, here's the joke: the ask hash, which is from the asset pipeline. That is just a generated file. You can ignore it. It generates up a get ignore for you, which is kind of nice. And then there is the build.gradle. This is probably the last most interesting file. This is where you put your dependencies, where all of the plugins that all the like Spring type plugins, or well, actually these are Gradle plugins, but all the ones that actually build up Spring Boot and make the app a Grails app are applied here. But there's also the other dependencies which you get by default, which are specific Grails plugins, or you can also this is where you'd also define like libraries, like external libraries that you want to include in your application. There is a default setup for Selenium WebDriver, and it tells you right out of the gate, update this with something else. So, if you're going to be doing functional tests, this is something you would change here. And let's see, that's pretty much all I'm going to talk about for the build.gradle for now. There's also a Gradle.properties, which this is where you will tell it which version of Grails you're using. And basically, when I hit this little refresh, depending on which Grails version it has here, it will actually go and download all the dependencies of that. You can also specify the wrapper version here too, so I think it will actually update the wrapper version for you as well. And these are just from the Gradle wrapper, and that's pretty much it. I know that's kind of a lot, and we'll save the rest for the next video, where I'll go over the configuration in a little bit more detail. So till then.